The world watched in disbelief as Oprah Winfrey, the queen of televised confessions, suddenly paused mid-sentence, visibly shaken. Within seconds, her tone shifted. What was meant to be another iconic moment turned into an unprecedented apology. But what forced one of the most powerful women in media to publicly backtrack live, and without warning? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began like any other highly anticipated Oprah special, intimate lighting. A hushed crowd. A promise of revelations that would ripple through Buckingham Palace once again. Oprah, master of the pause, leaned into the camera with a confidence that only decades of media dominance could provide. She was building toward a major revelation, one that would, as teased in promos, reshape public perception of royal relationships. But then, something unexpected. A slight murmur in her earpiece. A tightened jaw. Her gaze flickered not toward the audience, but toward someone just off camera. And in that instant, the tone of the broadcast collapsed. Gone was the charismatic storytelling. Instead, Oprah reached for a folded sheet of paper, previously unseen, and with a wavering breath, began reading. The words were chilling in their neutrality. "We regret certain assertions made regarding the Princess of Wales. Our intent was never to cause undue harm or misrepresentation." The crowd fell silent. Viewers across the globe blinked in disbelief. Was this a script change? A media stunt? Or something far more serious? Almost instantly, royal correspondents began scrambling for answers. Networks cut to emergency analysts. Something seismic had occurred live, unplanned, and deeply consequential. Within minutes, hashtags like #Oprah apologizes and #Catherine strikes back took over social media, with trending topics climbing in over 50 countries. Every second of the apology was dissected. What did certain assertions refer to? Was this connected to the unaired segments from the explosive interview with Meghan and Harry? Or had something new been said that had pushed the future Queen of England past the breaking point? While the apology was brief, the implications were anything but. For Oprah to read such a statement on live television suggested more than public regret. It hinted at legal pressure, reputational risk, and private threats that were too costly to ignore. And then came the silence. No further elaboration. No deviation from the statement. Oprah moved on, professionally but hurriedly, clearly unsettled. This wasn't a media moment, it was a retreat. A strategic surrender in the face of unseen power. Viewers didn't just witness an apology, they witnessed a shift in the media royal power dynamic. One that hadn't occurred since Diana first exposed the palace walls to global scrutiny. But this time, the royal figure under fire wasn't fleeing. She was fighting, and her silence had become her sword. But behind this public retreat was a silent war that had been raging for weeks, a legal warning so explosive, it forced America's most untouchable icon to her knees. Behind palace walls, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had finally reached her limit. After months of staying silent, the calm surface cracked. The world's most poised royal had quietly assembled a legal team, but why now? And what pushed her past the point of no return? For months, the whispers had grown louder. Though Catherine never publicly responded, the air around her thickened with quiet humiliation. It began subtly backhanded remarks in interviews, emotionally loaded insinuations from palace outsiders, and carefully edited media specials designed to provoke reaction without accountability. The second wave of Meghan's media campaign, strategically timed and laced with indirect accusations, had reopened wounds the public thought had been sealed. But this time, it wasn't just words. It was a calculated move from Oprah's production team. Rumors swirled that unaired footage from their explosive royal interview contained deeply personal claims about Catherine, claims that painted her as cold, distant, and even manipulative behind palace walls. These weren't mere gossip, they were narrative-shifting statements, ones with the power to fracture her carefully upheld image as the future queen consort. Inside Kensington Palace, the pressure was no longer ignorable. One evening, behind the heavy doors of a private study, Catherine sat in silence opposite Prince William. The air was brittle. He spoke cautiously, suggesting perhaps they wait and watch. But Catherine had already made up her mind. She looked him in the eye and said just one word: enough. That was the moment everything changed. What followed was a string of confidential meetings, held outside the palace's reach. Catherine didn't rely on the royal family's legal advisors. Instead, she turned to one of the UK's most formidable legal firms, known for silencing the loudest voices in media. Their reputation wasn't built on public trials, but quiet victories, the kind where headlines vanish and careers crumble silently in back rooms. Catherine's legal team began an aggressive review of Oprah's upcoming content, anticipating every angle of potential defamation and invasion of privacy. The language of the draft legal warning wasn't polite, it was surgical. It dissected every possible legal breach and laid out a path toward litigation so severe, Hollywood insiders reportedly advised Oprah's camp to reconsider their entire broadcast. Still, the palace made no official statement. There were no leaks from royal aides, no cleverly placed rebuttals in friendly tabloids. Catherine operated alone, her silence no longer a sign of submission, but of strategy. Every move she made was intentional. Every decision carried weight. She wasn't reacting, she was retaliating. But the storm was already brewing in the media world, and what Catherine's lawyers uncovered in Oprah's vault would send tremors through every studio involved. Hidden from the public, buried in digital archives, were tapes never meant to air. But Catherine's legal team got access, and what they heard wasn't just damaging. It was dangerous. And suddenly, Oprah's empire was exposed to a threat it had never faced before. The discovery came after weeks of quiet but relentless investigation. Catherine's legal team had anticipated pushback, but they hadn't expected this. What began as a review of Oprah's planned broadcast transformed into a high-stakes excavation of everything stored within the vaults of Harpo Productions. It wasn't just unused footage, it was a trove of raw interviews, off-camera conversations, unfiltered commentary, and internal producer discussions that revealed more than anyone outside that studio was ever supposed to know. Within those files was a segment never aired, one that centered around a deeply speculative narrative about an alleged private altercation between Catherine and Meghan. It painted Catherine as cold, distant, even cruel, a characterization rooted in hearsay, not evidence. But the real bombshell wasn't the segment itself, it was the deliberate framing. The voiceover, the edits, the scripting, it all suggested motive, alluded to guilt. And that's where the line was crossed. One particularly incendiary moment referred to Catherine's so-called emotional absence from her children during a critical family moment. The claim, unfounded and anonymous in origin, struck a nerve not only with the legal team but with Catherine herself. It wasn't just defamatory, it was personal. The allegation implied she had failed as a mother, weaponizing one of the most sacred roles in her life to undermine her public persona. It wasn't an oversight. Internal emails later uncovered by an anonymous industry whistleblower exposed a chilling intent. Producers had actively debated whether pushing these boundaries would add necessary tension to the segment. One email read, "We all know the audience wants conflict. Let's not shy away from it." It was a media calculation, ruthless and calculated. But it was also legally reckless. Armed with this evidence, Catherine's lawyers escalated their strategy. The cease and desist letter they delivered wasn't standard, it was surgical. It outlined each defamatory implication, every breach of privacy, every moment where editorial liberty had crossed into character assassination. But they didn't stop there. The letter came accompanied by a libel warning that outlined potential financial damages in the millions, should the footage see the light of day. Suddenly, what was once just an upcoming special became a legal minefield. Oprah's team, blindsided, moved into crisis mode. Meetings turned urgent. Lawyers began rewriting scripts, scrapping segments, initiating internal audits to assess exposure. Oprah herself, known for her fearless interviewing style, was no longer just a host, she was a liability. For the first time in her career, the weight of her own empire began to shift from asset to risk. But it wasn't just Oprah who was vulnerable, because Catherine's next move would shake every celebrity who had ever spoken her name. Whispers turned to chaos as producers, executives, and publicists scrambled behind the scenes. Hollywood's once untouchable narrative about the royals was now radioactive. How did Catherine's legal stand terrify an entire industry known for its ruthless storytelling? It began like a ripple, quiet, almost dismissible. But within days of Catherine's legal action, that ripple became a tsunami, crashing into the foundations of celebrity media. Emails were unearthed, clips were re-examined, and nervous executives huddled in boardrooms to audit the damage they hadn't realized they'd inflicted. Networks that had once paraded around speculative royal content as entertainment were suddenly dialing back their bravado. Catherine's legal precision had achieved the unthinkable. She'd introduced fear into an industry that thrived on impunity. Behind closed doors, producers combed through past footage, especially episodes where her name had been mentioned even in passing. Segments that had once aired with gleeful sarcasm or dramatic insinuation were now liabilities. Editors began pulling content from streaming platforms quietly and without announcement, hoping to avoid the same fate that had just gripped Oprah's empire. Informal legal memos began circulating, not through formal channels but via personal inboxes. Gossip show hosts who had once chuckled through thinly veiled jabs at Catherine received private warnings, gentle in tone but loaded with consequence. You may wish to consider the potential legal implications of your recent programming. One note read. The message was clear. Catherine was watching. Or worse, someone was watching for her. And that reality changed everything. Netflix, which had been preparing a new docuseries exploring modern royal fractures, suddenly shelved the project indefinitely. Officially, it was labeled a creative pause. Unofficially, insiders confirmed the decision came down to one concern: Catherine's legal team was simply too effective. The panic wasn't limited to networks, it spread to Hollywood's elite. Agents and publicists began advising their celebrity clients to refrain from any comments regarding the Princess of Wales, no matter how neutral or well-meaning. One publicist, speaking anonymously, admitted, "We're telling people, don't engage, don't post, don't react. You don't want to get on that radar." Talk shows, once eager to fan the flames of royal drama, adopted a noticeably restrained tone when the topic of the Wales family surfaced. Segments once designed to provoke had become polite, scripted, and emotionally neutral. It wasn't censorship, it was survival. At the center of it all, Oprah faced the greatest crisis of her media reign. Her inner circle, usually confident and assertive, began to fracture. Advisors urged a bold step: go public with a formal apology. Not to appease the public, but to protect the brand. Oprah's name, her empire, and her influence had collided with an unexpected wall of consequence. And for the first time, she wasn't leading the narrative, she was retreating from it. Her options were narrowing. Either she accepted the apology strategy or risked being portrayed as a media titan who had finally gone too far. But while Oprah prepared to take the hit, Catherine's team had eyes on someone else, someone far closer to home. The one-time royal sisters-in-law, once hoped to be the face of a modern monarchy, now stood on opposite sides of a silent battlefield. And as Catherine pulled the legal trigger, Meghan found herself suddenly isolated even from her most powerful ally. In the echo of Catherine's legal onslaught, the fallout reached far beyond London. It traveled across the Atlantic, landing squarely on Meghan's doorstep with a weight she hadn't anticipated. Sources close to the Duchess of Sussex insist she had no knowledge of the full scope of Oprah's upcoming special. She had assumed, as she had always done, that Oprah's editorial team would act with discretion, curating the footage with fairness, even empathy. But instead, they had gone for edge, for implication, for drama. And now, those choices had become a noose tightening around Meghan's carefully rebuilt public image. Panic set in behind closed doors. Meghan's team, blindsided, reached out through informal channels, desperate to understand the legal direction Catherine was taking. Their messages, insiders claim, were met with terse responses or, worse, silence. It didn't take long for the damage to manifest. Though Meghan had not spoken the most damning words, her association was enough. The public doesn't dissect edits and post-production nuances, they see headlines, they absorbed guilt by proximity. Catherine's silence only amplified the tension. There was no public accusation, no direct naming, but the message was deafening. Betrayal had occurred, and the future queen was not willing to forgive it quietly. Caught in the middle, Oprah, who had once thrown her platform behind Meghan with unwavering support, began to retreat. Not publicly, not dramatically, but symbolically. Invitations were missed. Public references to Meghan were noticeably absent. And within Oprah's circle, the narrative began to shift from defense to damage control. Brand loyalty took precedence over personal ties. The once formidable alliance between interviewer and interviewee now strained under the weight of legal scrutiny and public backlash. Meghan, always aware of her perception in the public eye, found herself vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since her early days in the royal spotlight. This time, she couldn't control the script. And the worst part? She wasn't even the author of the controversy. Yet the consequences were falling on her shoulders. The whispered divide between Meghan and Oprah became more than a rumor, it became an industry reality. Conversations turned cautious. Former advocates stepped back. A silence spread that was more damaging than criticism. It was abandonment. What had once been a united front against royal rigidity had fractured into self-preservation and fractured loyalties. Meghan was, once again, alone in the storm. Only this time, it wasn't the firm she was battling, it was the very hands that once lifted her up. And as the fallout reached California, an unexpected figure re-entered the fray, determined to protect Catherine's legacy from further erosion. Prince William, usually reserved and diplomatic, made a rare intervention. This time, it wasn't for the crown. It was for his wife. And his message to the media elite was clear. Catherine was not a target, they had crossed a line. Inside the palace, the tide had changed. Until now, William had watched with caution, letting Catherine lead the charge with quiet strength and legal precision. But the deeper the crisis grew, the more he saw what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about a media controversy, it was about his wife's dignity, his children's future, and the public destruction of a woman who had given everything to the institution he was born into. He didn't explode in front of cameras. He didn't issue a statement. What he did was far more powerful. Behind locked doors, William summoned the royal media advisors for a meeting unlike any they'd had in recent memory. There was no small talk, no ceremony. His tone was clipped, his words precise. He laid out what he referred to as reputational red lines, boundaries that could no longer be crossed without severe and lasting consequences. And he made it clear, those lines had already been breached. This wasn't William the heir. This was William the husband, the father, the protector. A side of him rarely seen by the public, but well known to those within the palace walls. Furious yet composed, he demanded a recalibration of the royal family's media strategy, one that would no longer rely on outdated courtesies or veiled warnings. The age of silent suffering was over. That same week, a confidential memo drafted personally by William began circulating among senior advisors and selected press contacts. It was a warning disguised as a guideline, a statement of intent without ever needing to name names. And though it never used the word retaliation, its message was unmistakable. Any further attacks on Catherine would be met with force, legal, reputational, and institutional. Catherine, who had carried the weight of the storm alone until now, was visibly moved by his resolve. For the first time since the scandal erupted, they stepped out together in a coordinated public appearance. Observers noted the shift immediately. It wasn't just unity, it was strategy. A deliberate, silent signal that the Waleses were now acting in tandem, not as individuals, but as a force. The press, sensing the temperature change, began to pull back. Stories softened. Language shifted. Suddenly, there was hesitation where once there had been boldness. The royal aides, long seen as ceremonial intermediaries, began to flex long dormant muscles. Leaks were plugged. Journalists were stonewalled. An iron curtain was quietly drawn, and the message was clear. Still, the public wanted answers. Media speculation intensified about what was happening behind the scenes. Headlines spoke of the firm's revenge, though no official retaliation was confirmed. It didn't have to be. The effects were visible. Control had returned to the palace, and with it, the balance of power had started to tilt. But for Oprah, the reckoning was only beginning. But as the royals circled their wagons, Oprah had no choice face the storm or risk her legacy being rewritten. She'd built her empire on truth-telling, on drawing out secrets others dared not touch. But this time, Oprah's voice trembled. The apology wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a moment of reckoning, as she addressed the world with words she never imagined she'd say. It was supposed to be just another headline-making episode. Oprah had done it countless times before, navigating scandal, controversy, and celebrity confessions with effortless control. But the air was different that day. There was no grand prelude, no dramatic build-up. Instead, midway through her own segment, she paused. The studio audience waited, breath held. And then came the shift. Her eyes, usually commanding and unshaken, lowered. Her tone, polished and powerful, softened to something unfamiliar: humility. Without preamble, she delivered what she called a personal statement. The room was silent. Viewers across the world leaned in as she spoke words that hung heavier than any royal admission that had come before. She acknowledged unverified insinuations made in recent media involving the royal family. She expressed regret for any unintended hurt those statements may have caused. She didn't say Catherine's name. She didn't have to. Every word, every pause, every glance off camera made it crystal clear who the apology was for. This was not about protecting a segment, it was about protecting a legacy. For decades, Oprah had been untouchable. But now, she was cornered by a woman who had never spoken publicly against her, never granted an interview, and never lifted a microphone. Catherine's silence had become more powerful than any words Oprah could ever air. Reaction was instant and polarizing. Some viewers praised Oprah's accountability, saying it was courageous for a figure of her stature to walk back a narrative. Others weren't so forgiving. They called it strategic, insincere, rehearsed. They dissected her phrasing, questioned her motives, and speculated whether the apology was forced by legal threats or public pressure. The media frenzy exploded. Analysts broke down the segment frame by frame. Newsrooms spun their own takes, some sympathetic, some seething. For 48 hours, the world forgot every other headline. Oprah's apology was everywhere. Yet behind the optics, the tension remained unresolved. Catherine hadn't responded. There was no royal statement, no acknowledgement of the apology. And in that silence, new questions began to fester. Had Oprah truly made amends, or had she merely surrendered? Had the balance of power between media and monarchy finally shifted? Or was this just another calculated play in a long game neither side fully controlled? One thing was clear. Something irreversible had occurred. Oprah, for the first time, had blinked. And the ripple effects were just beginning to show. Because while the cameras captured one woman's public reckoning, the real battle for narrative control was still raging in the shadows. But in the shadows of this televised retreat, the bigger question still lingered: was this truly the end of the media war on Catherine? She never raised her voice. She never gave an interview. Yet somehow, Catherine had won. With a single legal threat, she had bent media giants to their knees. But what does her silence truly mean? And what power does she now quietly hold? In an age where every figure of influence seems desperate to speak, host, or perform, Catherine did something that defied the norm. She stayed still. While studios reeled and headlines spun, she made no public comment, no interviews, no rebuttals. Instead, she chose presence over proclamation. A single appearance with her children, hand in hand under the cold British sky, said more than any press conference ever could. There was no dramatic backdrop, no obvious performance. And yet, the symbolism was deafening. The mother, the future queen, unshaken. In that one quiet moment, public sympathy returned to her like a wave. Not just as a royal, but as a woman who had chosen dignity over spectacle. Analysts were quick to draw conclusions. Headlines pivoted from speculative scandal to narratives of resilience. Catherine was no longer being dissected, she was being defended. The public, worn out by noise, seemed to crave the very restraint she embodied. Inside media circles, however, the consequences were more than emotional, they were structural. Several tabloid editors found themselves quietly shut out from palace access, their credentials mysteriously denied or revoked. Briefings were shortened. Invitations rescinded. The message was clear. Trust had a price, and it had been broken. Behind the scenes, legal experts were already citing the episode as a turning point in royal privacy enforcement. For decades, the monarchy had tolerated invasions under the guise of public interest. But Catherine had drawn a new line and crossed it with precision. Her legal actions didn't just win her personal reprieve, they opened the door for future royals to demand boundaries. The era of consequence-free speculation was faltering. And as that realization spread, so too did a shift in public discourse. Suddenly, Catherine wasn't just seen as a princess, she was being reframed as something larger. A wave of independent documentaries began appearing online and on streaming platforms, each dissecting the quiet strength of a woman who had endured everything from fabricated rumors to global scrutiny. Yet, never lashed out. Titles like The People's Queen in Waiting and Royal Without Revenge began gaining traction. Influencers, commentators, and even former critics began praising her restraint as revolutionary. She had navigated a digital minefield without stepping once into the fray, and emerged not only unscathed, but exalted. It wasn't her silence alone that made the impact. It was how she used it. While others scrambled, apologized, or retreated, Catherine had simply stood still and let the chaos collapse around her. In doing so, she had proven something even more unsettling to her detractors. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She only needed to endure. Her silence, once mistaken for submission, had revealed itself as strategy. But behind closed doors, there remained one final confrontation, one that would never air on TV, but would forever change the private bond between two of the world's most influential women. No cameras, no lawyers. Just two women icons in their own right on a private call, miles apart, but forever entangled. Oprah had offered an apology to the world. Now she offered something more personal to the woman whose silence had spoken volumes. The world had moved on, at least on the surface. Headlines faded, analysts pivoted, and the news cycle spun forward. But in the shadows, something unresolved remained, a question of closure not for the public, but for two women bound by circumstance, reputation, and an invisible war neither of them had intended to wage this way. A trusted insider revealed that weeks after Oprah's live apology, a discreet effort was made to initiate direct contact. Not through representatives, not through aides, just two voices, stripped of influence and audience, speaking without performance. Catherine, cautious as ever, agreed, but only under the strictest condition: absolute confidentiality. There would be no leaks, no statements, and no summaries handed to the press. What was said would remain between them. The call, though brief, carried a weight no public interview could match. It was not reconciliation. It was reckoning. Oprah's voice, the same that had coaxed truths out of presidents and celebrities, now trembled with something rare, unfiltered remorse. Not for the sake of the cameras, not to salvage reputation, but for what had gone too far. She admitted that editorial decisions had consequences far beyond her intentions. That lines were crossed, even if indirectly. Catherine listened. Not coldly, not with anger, but with a kind of calculated calm that only those who have suffered silently for too long can master. When she finally spoke, her words were measured, yet they struck with unmistakable clarity. Protecting my children isn't negotiable. There was no theatricality, no demand for more. Just a boundary that had now been cemented in personal history. The two women, once joined by global admiration and narrative power, now stood on either side of an invisible chasm. Respect was acknowledged, but trust, once fractured, remained unrepaired. Oprah offered no promises beyond what had already been said, and Catherine didn't ask for any. There were no lingering goodbyes, no emotional crescendos, only the echo of a call that had ended exactly as it needed to, not with resolution, but with understanding. In that silence, the story found its real conclusion, not in front of an audience, but in the rawness of human accountability. As the royal machine moves forward and the media resets its sights, one truth remains. Catherine, once underestimated, had rewritten the rules, and the world had finally listened. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.